Hi guys, it's Danica Christin, and in this video I'm going to be comparing uni in Australia and in Germany. I am German, I was born in Germany, and that is where I got my bachelor's degree in business. Later on I moved to Australia where I got my master's degree in international relations. If you're new to my channel, please make sure to subscribe as I make new videos about living abroad and traveling the world every week. In terms of getting into a degree, I found that was slightly more difficult in Germany, but that might be due to the fact that I went to the top university in Germany, whereas in Australia I went to a lesser known university. So that is probably why that's my perception. Other people might have had a different experience. My course in Germany was also a lot more difficult than the course I did in Australia, although the course I did in Australia was a master's degree, not a bachelor's degree as in Germany. My German course had an entry requirement of a very high GPA, and still I think about 30% of people failed the exams, not because they were stupid or they weren't working very hard. They were very intelligent people studying very, very hard, but it was just setting you up to fail basically, whereas in Australia it was fairly easy. I think in Australia, I'm not sure if anyone failed a unit in my course. I think there were a few people who maybe did, but it was really the exception, not the rule. And I had the feeling that universities in Australia generally don't want international students to fail because the courses are so much more expensive than in Germany. They cost, I think, 10 grand a semester, whereas in Germany it's like 500 euros. So it's a massive, massive difference. And in Germany, I think because courses are free, maybe they take on too many students because it's all about kicking students out of the course. It's really like that. If you fail an exam in Germany too many times, they're gonna kick you out of the course. It's very tough. In Australia, it's not like that. In terms of cost, though, I also have to say national students, so Australians and I think New Zealanders as well, pay a little bit less. So international students pay round about 10 grand a semester. It can vary depending on the course that you do and the level of course that you do. So are you doing a bachelor's degree or a master's degree? So local students pay less. I'm not sure how much it is, but it's still a few grand at least. And the good thing for them is that they can get a government loan to help pay their tuition. But it's not just tuition that is expensive in Australia. Living expenses are also vastly different. In Germany, I think my overall living expenses per month were around 700 to 800 euros, whereas in Australia it was between 1,500 and 2,000 Australian dollars. Now with the exchange rate, I think that's between 1,200 and 1,600 euros. So it was double of what I had in Germany. Australia is crazy expensive. In both countries, you are allowed to work 20 hours a week as a student. I think in Australia that only applies to international students, whereas for some reason in Germany, I think that also applies to local students. I personally, thankfully, didn't have to work in Germany because it was so cheap. In Australia, I was working 20 hours a week all the way through because otherwise I could have never ever afforded it. Another thing that was quite different is the workload. In Germany, because the course was a lot more difficult, I think I had about a 60-hour study week, so to speak, whereas in Australia I maybe put in 30 hours a week into my studies, which is, fair enough if you're working 20 hours on top of that. In Germany it was all study, 7 days a week. My business degree that I did in Germany was very high level, very theoretical, and moving to Australia, applying for an international relations degree, I was kind of worried that that was going to be even more theoretical and kind of even less applicable. But then actually I was really pleasantly surprised because all of a sudden we weren't just talking about some business theory, but we were talking about real countries with real issues and real things going on. And it was just a lot more hands-on, which surprised me. I really found that very good and very refreshing. One thing I really liked about studying in Germany is that as a student in Germany, you are really treated like an adult, which I felt wasn't 100% the case in Australia. One example I have is attendance. In Australia, attendance is mandatory. if you don't attend enough times, like I think they kick you out of your unit or you can't finish the unit that semester. I'm not sure how it works because I obviously attended because it was so expensive. But in Germany, honestly, nobody cares whether you attend class or not. You're going to be sitting in a room with like 1, 2, 3, 400 people anyways, and they're not going to count. I personally prefer the German system here because a lot of the times I found that I didn't learn a lot in class and that I was a lot more efficient learning at home. So in Germany, I eventually just stopped going to class because it wasn't the way I learned. It wasn't for me. It wasn't the best way of studying for me. Whereas in Australia, I was forced to go to class while I thought, well, if I did that at home, I could learn it so much quicker. I don't know why universities treat students differently. I have one suspicion though, and that is that German students are a lot older when they start university because they start school later and school lasts for longer. So in Germany, when you enter university, you're like 19, almost 20 years old. Whereas I think in Australia, like 17, 18. I also think students are seen very differently in society in Germany versus Australia, because in Germany, students have historically always been kind of a political force. A lot of them were part of the resistance during World War II. So students in Germany have kind of a different reputation and take a different role in society. Another reason could also be that in Germany, when you go to university, you normally move out of home automatically, because in Germany, a lot of people live out in the countryside where there's no universities. So when you finish school, you need to move to a city, you need to move out of home to go to uni. Whereas in Australia, most people live in the big cities where there are plenty of universities, so nobody really needs to leave home. Plus, it's so much more expensive to leave home, so people often stay at home into their 20s, and maybe that also leads universities to treating students not as much as adults as Germany. One thing I found extremely interesting was the number of universities per city. In Melbourne, I think there were at least 8 universities, whereas in Munich there's only 2. And Berlin, which is a city that's more comparable in size to Melbourne, I think there's only 4 universities. In German cities, there are fewer universities, which I think also reflects society, because I think in Australia, a lot more people as a percentage of the population have degrees. There are also certain degrees that exist in Australia that are not degrees in Germany. One example is nursing. Nurses in Australia always have a university degree, whereas in Germany it's more comparable to a trade actually. Campuses are also much bigger in Australia because generally there is more space in Australia. The cities are sprawling a lot more. So my campus was quite big in Australia, whereas like in Germany, campuses are much smaller. They're typically in the city centre where there is not a lot of space. My university in Munich had kind of 2 main buildings, and then the rest of the university was kind of spread out in historic buildings around town. I don't have any footage of my campus in Australia, but I do have footage from my university campus in Munich, so I'll just insert that now. Another thing that I found to be very different is graduation ceremonies. Now in Australia, you get to wear that academic cap or whatever it's called, whereas in Germany for your graduation, you normally just wear a suit or a nice dress. I really like the way Australians get to graduate. I think it's similar to what they do in the US, and I find that so amazing. In Germany, it's a bit boring. University in Germany is also a lot more formal. You would always call your lecturer Professor Dr. Miller. That's how you address them. In Australia, it's just, hey Tim, how are you today? In Australia, you're just on a first name basis with all your lecturers, which is unthinkable in Germany. In my bachelor's degree in Germany, most of the students were actually German, and I think the largest foreign group was Bulgarians. And that is totally different from my experience in Australia. In my Australian class, I think I was definitely the only European, and about 20% were Australians, and the rest, they were all Asian. So it's really different. Like, there were like only 20% local students, which I found mind-blowing, because in Germany, the Germans had definitely the majority in the classroom. From what I've heard, in German universities, research is a lot more important than it is in Australia. That's not true for all Australian universities. I think there's like 8 universities called the Group of 8, and they do like 70% of the research in Australia. So these unis are more research based. In Germany, I think all unis are quite deeply rooted in research, whereas a lot of Australian universities just focus on teaching. Another really funny difference is kind of where you get your lunch. In Germany, there's this big, massive canteen that comes with pretty much every university, and you just have like a really cheap lunch there. Whereas like at my Australian campus, I just saw like little cafes here and there, and they were quite expensive. So I don't see how that was particularly affordable for students. And I think the German system in that sense is a lot more student friendly, because you have this big place where you can all get your lunch and eat together, and it's very cheap. Overall, it's quite difficult to compare the systems because they are very different. Germany is free, but it's also a lot more difficult. And in Australia, you have other advantages, like the courses are a lot more practical, they're less theoretical, and you have a much less formal setting. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about studying in Germany or Australia or in Czech Republic, because I've also done a semester abroad there. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.